Underway. Really pleased to be surrounded by these experts, and I'm conveying apologies for my colleague, Glenna Caldwell. She's an associate professor in the School of Architecture and Built Environment, and I had, up until a couple of days ago, earmarked her to be the chair. For personal family reasons, she had to drop out at short notice, and so I'm stepping in in order to fill the role of getting these fine ladies talking about Barrambin, but I think continuation that follows on very, very nicely from Barrambin, which is the Mount Coot-tha development. It's both the very successful win of fighting the zip line, and now the next battle is already on the doorstep, which is the Lumina light and laser show. So that's going to be the topic. I also just briefly mentioned the reason why Glenna was earmarked for this panel is because Glenna and I co-authored a paper that actually deals with some of these issues, which is called More-than-Human Media Architecture. It was actually our first, venture into that space at the intersection of the environmental humanities and tangible media interaction, because media architecture is all about light installations, media facades. If you're familiar with Vivid in Sydney, that's in essence media architecture. Projections onto the Opera House at the larger scale, and much smaller projections, light installations, LEDs at the smaller scale. And this paper that we published at the Media Architecture Biennale in 2018 dealt for the first time with the environmental consequences, which is light pollution, the related impacts on the insect world, on other nocturnal animals. In Brisbane, of course, a lot of arboreal and nocturnal animals, marsupials that we're all familiar with, that are not so happy about the fairy lights that are now very ubiquitous around the city. And just outside this building, at the entrance to the Gardens Point campus, where you come off the Goodwill Bridge, you will see that all the mangrove trees are pretty much doused in fairy lights at night, which is a wonderful photo opportunity for the humans, not so great for the non-human creatures and critters. So that's some of the aspects that connect the more-than-human with the panel discussion now. And we'll follow a similar format, so I might start with Elizabeth. Elizabeth Hamley, as you can see on the big screen here, is the founder and president of Brisbane Residents United. If you want to say a few words, and we'll go around.
Right. Welcome this morning. I was part of the founding committee of Brisbane Residents United, and what Brisbane Residents United is an umbrella organisation that was formed because we had all been part of individual groups, and we had all seen that we were actually fighting the same fight, but we were fighting it over and over again. And from that, we knew we were never going to win. So what we decided to do was that we would continue with our individual group activity, but we would also start to actually deal with things at a legislative and government level. So I've been doing that now for the last 25 years. So that's what Brisbane Residents United is about. Just for myself personally, I just wanted to say I actually started doing this. I am not a town planner. I'm not an architect. I'm not a landscape gardener. I was a computing person. So, and how I became involved with this was I was thinking to myself one day, and it was actually about Victoria Park, they should do something about that. And I suddenly realised I am they. So I began to do something about it. And I hear often from people, you can't do anything. Can I assure you, if you think you can't do anything, you're bloody right, because you won't. But if you believe that you can make change, then you can, and you will. So that's just the introduction that I wanted to start with for myself. So thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Welcome. And Sheena.
I agree. I think.
Can we just switch it on at the top there? There we go.
Thank you. I'm such an imposter, really. I work for World Health Organization. I'm a contraceptive practitioner for third world population control. So I've actually made a terrible mess, haven't I? But I read statistics this week that, in fact, if we placed people properly and we gave people land and allowed them to create their own food, that we could exist without the pressures we have today. But I came here to Australia for a short holiday, and we were invited to stay, and our passports were stamped in one afternoon without paying, as long as we would do some medical locums. And so here we are since 1978. And 3 children who, of course, brought up in the country, we all rapidly became immersed in nature. When I joined BirdLife, I was very concerned at how many birdwatchers enjoyed birdwatching, made endless duck lists, and showed off their photographs. And that's become even more important now because they've got such good lenses. But they're not keen to have conservation. I got involved 4 or 5 years ago with Steve McDonald at Reagan's 2030, and the Trinta campaign, as you see it now, is largely due to BirdLife, and they're bringing ACF on board. And we have made that yesterday morning on the streets of Brisbane, another thunderclap. We did say that the kangaroos, this is their land down under, and the government must not pull our bay asunder and plunder it, etc., etc. So I felt that if I started to protect the Bush Alliance, I could take people from different disciplines and we could do survey work and we could speak more for country. So, for instance, in writing to the Mayor on the 20th of May, I invited the Birds and Other Invertebrate Club to have a discussion. We spoke together. They also wrote a letter. We made reference to the death of insects. We made reference to the lighting systems and what happens in the gardens. And I'm delighted to say that Lord Mayor Schooner hasn't answered my letter, nor Trevor Lamkin, the president of the Boat Club. So does it annoy me that someone is so arrogant? Yes, it does. I think it's appalling. Because we would say that the Arboretum is a sacred place for trees, it's not a playground. So I have asked if I can do a survey there, and I would pull apart those trees and the 1.5 miles that they're going to put that development into. But I waited to see whether they were going to allow it over the line or not, and now they have. But we certainly have a period of time now where we can all respond against that process. And I look forward to doing that with some other people. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheena. Hira.
Hello, everyone. I'm Hira, and I'm a PhD candidate with More-than-Human Futures group at QUT. And my research focuses on urban, digital, and political issues, but to explore multi-species justice. In simpler words, I sort of see how cities can potentially be designed and also governed, not just for humans, but also for animals and plants and other natural ecosystems. And I think I sort of focus on the tension between human and non-human interests that might arise within city design, and how to mediate and find better solutions for those.
Thank you, Hira. And Roman.
Hi, I'm Bron Raftery. I'm with the Mount Coot-tha Protection Alliance, and our president is here as well today. Our group started with 3 people, and it was over the zipline protest, which Marcus mentioned had a lot more publicity, a lot more people knew about it. We got a lot more traction from the community. This one's been very difficult. A lot of people still don't know about the Lumina light show that's been approved by Brisbane City Council. And they don't, or if they do know about it, they certainly don't know that it could be for the next 10 years. So it's a 5-year lease with an option of another 5 years. And, we got involved with the zipline. The group probably stayed working, but not so vocal, but now has risen up again and getting a lot of interest on social media. But like Victoria Park, how does that translate in getting people to turn up to events and actually say something more? But then maybe it's just that's the way we have to do it.
Can I keep the spotlight on you straight away for those interstate visitors and those unfamiliar? What's the zip line and what's the Lumina light show proposal?
Okay, so the zip, we all call it the zip line, but in fact it was advertised as the mega zip line by the then Lord Mayor, an adrenaline-filled experience, and it was 6 cables of zip line across the face of Mount Coot-tha. So when you look out here, you probably would have seen the structures. There was also a suspension bridge and another smaller zip line over the back of the mountain. But the difference with that proposal was that, it's similar to Lumina in that the council approved both, despite the protest. But with that one, the council also advertised it much more widely. We had whole newsletters came out and it was just the zip line. So people don't know about the Lumina light show and what's proposed for the Botanic Gardens. But the Botanic Gardens at Mount Coot-tha are the second most visited place in Brisbane, behind South Bank. And the council's attitude was, well, you already get over 1 million visitors there every year, so we want to increase that and activate the space at night. Why? So they're looking at a small area of the gardens, and that's what they were pushing mainly, but the development application was for a material change of, or is for a material change of use for over 50 hectares. It includes Anzac Park at Toowong and a good portion of the gardens. So council's been very quiet about it because they don't want people to know. What else are they planning? They're saying we're only using a small area. The Lumina light shows 4,500 square metre, 1 kilometre loop. So they're saying, oh, we're only doing this over here, so it's not a problem. Why are you talking about all this other land? But once they've proved, which they have, that material change of use, what are they planning? Or what are they thinking is going to happen with all the rest of that land? And a botanic garden is there for people to enjoy during the day, to be educated about plants. Because of where it is and it adjoins Mount Coot-tha Forest, it's animal habitat. And that's grown over the years of 1976, I think, it opened. And a lot of community support, a lot of volunteers, a lot of gardening groups involved. A lot of people have given over their time with no payment and enhance that area, and they feel very passionate about it.
We've heard from Beverly, who mentioned in the previous panel from the audience that council had allocated a lot of the operations to a private company, a holding company. It sounds like this is also proposed to be a ticketed event, private operator, some of the hostels.
Yes, that's true. And we started protesting and saying they're privatising public land, and council has been at pains to say that's not what's happening. So somebody said to me, town planning, somewhat in council, I guess, has become about people who tick boxes and legal advice. And that seems to be the way it is from the responses we get back from council.
And I sense from the distinction you drew between the zipline experience and the Lumina experience, the fact that council is now, in essence, trying to keep this under wraps as long as possible. Would you suggest that is a result of the zipline campaign?
I think it is. That's my feeling anyway. That's a personal feeling, I guess. Not everyone might agree with me, but I think they learned lessons from it. And I heard the Lord Mayor on radio, on ABC Radio a couple of weeks ago. He didn't call us NIMBYs, but that's usually what happens, and we're a bit of a nuisance. But there's a lot of experts in the community. A lot of people have vested interest in these beautiful gardens, and they all wrote pretty amazing objection submissions, just disregarded. The ecology doesn't seem to matter. So they'll look at everything against the planning, and that's it. Nothing else seems to be of concern. But that's not how we all feel.
Mm.
Now, that's not how residents feel and people who value that area feel at all.
Can I get a show of hands before you've seen the program or today's event? Who has heard of the Lumina live show being proposed?
Oh, well done. Come to a banner crew. Although,
I've got activists there.
yeah.
But I think if we were to repeat this little vox pop out there in the mainstream public, it might be a very different picture.
Yes.
Hira, your PhD has been focusing on governance and specifically smart urban governance. What we've been talking about touches on planning, engagement, deliberation, people making submissions, signing petitions, maybe even protesting. I think a lot of these kinds of forms of citizenship and democratic engagement fall under that rubric of governance. From your point of view and what you've been studying, both the theory and the empirical work, what's wrong with governance?
What's right with it?
Just a small
That's a small
question.
I feel it really comes down to what we are prioritizing, and we are still very stuck within prioritizing economic development and economic growth. And anything that might come possibly in the way of that, there are a lot of like legislative loopholes, or even I think digital, like the way digital tools are being employed to even protect biodiversity. There are loopholes within how they are used that eventually those protection mechanisms or laws are always bypassed by the developers in one way or the other. And I think when it comes to community engagement, community is much more like local communities are connected with the biodiversity that maybe like people from top-down planning are not even local residents in the places that they are making decisions about. And I think that removed kind of decision making is one of the, I would say, a bigger problem with governance today. Yeah.
And in response to that, your thesis and the research is looking at multi-species justice. Can you try and introduce that concept to the audience?
Yes, so I think multi-species justice talks about justice not just for humans, but actually how humans and non-humans coexist together and how to facilitate those relationships, justice for those relationships, but also individual entities, not just human, that also includes animals and plants. And I think specifically with the case of Mount Coot-tha, like there is always human interests sort of are coming in way, or there's a conflict between non-human interests and they're favored. And sometimes they are for reasons like human safety, but in this case, it's like a mass entertainment sort of thing with light show, which is not necessarily in any way necessary for humans. And I think there's a lot of research on how artificial nightlight is disrupting wildlife. And I think the main purpose of anything like a botanical garden in a city is, like Baron also said, to collect the locals with the native species and biodiversity. And a lot of that would be impacted by something like a night show, and even small. And I think if you stand upon like Mount Coot-tha, you can already see a lot of light at night from the city itself, which is impacting the non-human species, and it can sort of affect the way they hunt, they mate, or they breed. And actually, I was reading that while the people who are installing the light show, they say that no plants will be removed or damaged, or trees. But actually, the effect on species is kind of similar to tree clearing, because species sort of are, like the way they move is guided by light and night vision, and a lot of the species would not be able to move, and it would have a sort of a similar effect as you would fragment a piece of land or tree habitat from there. Yeah.
I'm interested in one more concept in terms of multi-species justice, which has come up throughout the conference the last 2 days, which is that of jurisprudence and the rights of nature. So there is examples where, for instance, in Ecuador, the constitution there has anchored rights of nature at the very kind of most senior level, if you like, and also there is river systems in India and New Zealand that have been given rights. If we had a situation where Mount Coot-tha as an ecosystem had a similar kind of stature of being given rights, what difference would that perhaps make, if any?
I think it definitely would make a difference, but not necessarily. I think it's from the perspective of humans that we need certain kind of laws to be able to restrict certain developments from happening. But at the same time, I think in my study, I explore how just giving rights to non-human within a human legislative system does not necessarily look into how to strengthen their communities. And I think that one example is how trees communicate with each other. While you might, rights of nature might allow the tree not to be cut down, but it necessarily doesn't look into how the trees sort of coexist together in harmony, and how do you facilitate those those systems. So I think it's, but I definitely think it's useful, and maybe for some things like a light show, it can be something that can be brought up from the local communities that are protesting against this sort of intervention, to use it as something that they can use for their petition to, like that this shouldn't go forward.
Thanks, Sarah. And now, I'm not sure if you're able to answer the question, but being a part of BirdLife Southern Queensland, you might be able to. What kinds of bird life would we be able to experience around Mount Coot-tha?
Well, the reason I moved my conservation focus from bird life to protect the bush alliance is we were brought in, not because of, but one example was we could only contribute for Powerful Owl for the zip line. And we were able to send one of our BirdLife officers in. We were able to get the system moved, the roots moved away from the roost trees. And a lot of people said, well, that was really useless, BirdLife, you should have stopped. But that was only a little component part of what we could actually contribute. And then what I call in BirdLife conservation, duck ponds, redlands filling in farm dams. We have Moreton Bay, there's clearing in Ipswich. There's so much happening. There's Eagleby wetlands. I can only find Eagleby wetlands with what's on Queensland Government WildNet database, which is not very much. And yet eBird used by bird watchers has 1,200 different lists. So I was able to actually get that and synthesize it all into one Excel spreadsheet and see how common birds were, but also how frequently things like painted snipe came. Because snipe is one bird, because it's EPBC Act, it's an MNES, and it says that you've got to find things that are threatened to be able to fight something. So frankly, everything's threatened. 80% of Germany's biomass of insects is threatened, and they don't know quite why. Some soils have high capacity, high occurrence of aluminium. Where is it coming from? Is it aviation spray? What is it? So if we just look at our landscape as a whole, and the integrity of the entire landscape is dependent, then this is a very good example where the insects, the leaf litter, the decomposition that's happening at ground layer, the little larvae of one particular hazarded moth is eating 80%, decomposing 80% of eucalypt leaves, another 20% done by little beetles. Upset any of that, then the functionality of the system is shot. So give an example out at Kingaroy. There was to be a coal mine which would just virtually move 20 odd farmers out of their farms. And the Environment Authority, saying what Ron said, it's a ticking exercise. So the proponent had done the Environment Authority and described that landscape as a degraded farm system with eroded creeks. So I visited 4 times, so I got seasonal variation. I took a botanist and an ecologist with me, and we worked very hard for a year. We found a regional ecosystem threatened, 1 vulnerable, an area of land that used to belong to Old Joe, which had 15 rare plants on it, 3 of them very rare, 7 sites with koalas on the mine footprint. The holes that had been made by the miner were not covered, so that was a breach of regulation because animals could go down his drill holes. So I was at a meeting with the Environment Minister of the day, and I said, well, that's what you've ticked off. But that's actually what's there. And all of those things there are matters of national environment significance. I leave it with you. 6 months later, and I'm sure the room is always silent, of course, because that's a discomfort for people. You're ticking off rubbish. And it's happening all day, every day. And it's exactly how this submission is worded, would do no harm. Are you absurd that you do no harm? Of course you do harm. So 6 months later, someone in the mining department, the Department of Environment, rang up and said, I'd like to speak to you about that report. And I had a tachycardia because I thought they were going to say to me, mind your own damn business, because we're all going to make some money. In fact, what they did was get the miner in, so they breached him for his failure. He had no money for upfront. We knew he was rotten anyway. But they said, all right, now you've got to do full EIS. That costs consultants at least $1,500 a day. It is $40,000 to get that ecologist to write that report. And he had no money. So they took the ML and they walked away, and he walked away, and there's no mining lease over Kingaroy. And 20 people get to stay on their farms, and the village of Topinga has not been flattened. Now, David Littleproud and a pile of people went there, and it's Deb Fred Clinton's backyard, and she didn't want to mine, but none of them stopped it. None of them stopped it. They had their little photo shoot. What stopped it was 7 koalas photographed in situ with the GPS. What stopped it was the ecological community, and it is the ecological community in its entirety that we're trying to protect in Mount Coot-tha. So we will challenge PEIS work. Now the IUCN CBD says very clearly, all levels of governments do no harm. And that's actually quite powerful because people will ignore us, and they have ignored us. But I put that in a letter to Maroochydore Council. You won't cut that grass for grasshoppers because you, not the council, you environment person, are the person that advises council to cut that grass. And you must do no harm because that's your responsibility. They didn't answer my letter. They gave me an appointment within a week. So put that on them, people. You must do no harm.
Thank you. Right. It is a very interesting story. To build on that, I see that there is a lot of power differentials. One is with regards to what we heard earlier, and what I think we intuitively all believe in, which is evidence-based and evidence-based submissions and evidence-based decision-making and policy-making and so forth. And that term gets used a lot. But let's unpack this a little bit. For instance, the ability for that evidence to be produced based on data collection, analysis. Here we have the luxury of accessing infrastructure and resources at a cushy salary for the university, but that doesn't necessarily fall into place all the time. So if you're up against vested interest, corporate money that are producing these glossy reports that produce a certain perspective or picture of evidence that suits their interests, what are the kinds of ways or tactics that we can mount the similarly compelling case to then really engage on par, rather than being, in essence, the small squeaky wheel that is noisy but is not taken seriously? It seems you have this success story. What are the kinds of elements in there that others can learn from?
I guess we did it at Tunda because Redlands 2030 are a very powerful, passionate group of people that have committed so much time. And I met Steve McDonald at an event at Goma, and he quietly gave me his card, and I said, we must add the biodiversity of the bay. And having lived in the Whitsundays for a long time, when I was a young woman with children on the beach, I could watch dugongs with their pups on Cannon Vale Beach. And there was a little jetty where people brought in their tin dinghies. As soon as it became a formal jetty, built right out with a seawall and lots of boats and vessels and skidoos and every other noisy thing in the land and petrochemicals, the seagrass went, the dugong went, the entire tidal flow of the bay went. That will happen at Toondah. So we took on the birds and the curlews because, again, the matters of national environment significance. I've lost my flow, but your question was how can we...
The evidence and to what extent it actually is of the calibre that is taken seriously.
I think to gather the data. So if we looked at how much data the Queensland government had, at the time the proponent for that development had said, the fact that there are only 74% of Godwits left means that the 24% of Godwits are coming now still have 100% of Moreton Bay to feed in. So it actually doesn't matter that the 25% that's left still has 100% of the landscape. That doesn't in any way address the biomanthic, the fact that little stints are just going to get little wireworms, but the big curlers are going to go down and get bivalves and split them open. We're not looking at a multidisciplinary, multi-species approach of everything that needs that bay. So I guess having to really gather data and pull up the government, and I think we did that in Toondah, in that we were given 40 days to examine an over 5,600-page EIS document from Walker. So that was the road, the traffic, the schooling, the hospitals, the pressure on the bay, but also the biodiversity. And so lots of people got into the working groups, and we got into working groups that looked at, right, how did they address migratory shorebirds? How did they address the health of mangroves and the effect on mangroves? And then challenge it. Walker have sat on that for 8 months. Now, why have they sat on it for 8 months and not given us the responsive EIS, which we're waiting for, which is a due process? Because they're trying to find 1,001 excuses to justify the rubbish that is going to completely waste Moreton Bay, which is a Ramsar site, which you all know we signed. And although we have Ramsar sites and we've got to look after them, we're actually obliged to look after all of our wetlands. So we already have 831 gas wells out in the Coonjee Lakes and in Western Queensland in key biodiversity areas. There's lots of migratory birds out there, and there are lots of declines in our birds in the west, partly because of climate change and drought. We can only gather science. We've really got to gather data, and it's a one powerful thing under the law. And Minister Plibersek said this weekend. I just attended the LP conference for 3 days, and Peter Casey, who's the head of Environment Labour, reassured us yesterday. I think the minister is very sensitive and very concerned about Ramsar. I mean, muck on egg on their face if this goes through. Bye-bye anesthesia next year. We've got to have that bay because it is such a catastrophe to say to the entire world that we have Rockamba, Jamba, all these international agreements that we've signed on to, but at the end of the day, we will do what we want. And we're doing that to First Nations people too. We stand up and we honour them past, present and emerging. There's an emerging young traditional owner trying to save land at Deebing Creek. Because he's been rather a pain in the neck, and he's a bit scruffy with bare feet, it's fine to treat him badly. And they've taken away his Twitter account, his Facebook account and his telephone. He has no means of communication, and he's poverty stricken, and he's bleeding his heart out to save his Aboriginal bones. But don't you worry, we are going to respect you as an emerging elder. No, we're not. We're going to send 100 policemen the day you create harry-carry for Lend-Lease, who are corrupt and rotten and dodging their tax, by the way. We'll send 100 coppers to deal with you. Are we showing respect to that young man? Of course we're not. So it's tokenism. And I sound like a cranky old woman.
You are in fine company.
Wear that
You're in
honestly.
fine company. I think the tokenism and the engagement theatre that we've come across in both panels is really quite popular. I want to ask Elizabeth two things actually. One is around the kinds of catalysts and the support that, in essence, the vested interests are benefiting from when it comes to communicating these things to the mainstream kinds of audiences. So everyone has busy lives, and Neil has very well demonstrated, 1 kilo, here's another kilo. I like the fact that the unit has changed from the number of pages to the weight of the pages. So no one has time really, unless you're passionate activists, to sift through and make sense of it. So it's much easier to be bedazzled by Channel 7, and there's a corporate little PR story that is resold as news. How do we fight that? How do we kind of cut through the social media, the corporatized news media that is actually just doing the bidding for the developers?
I'm going to make nothing beats self-interest. Sorry, it's a very glib statement, but it's actually true. What you have to do is try and work out what is going to appeal to the maximum number of people in your community and how do you reach them. I was involved in the major sort of thing that I was involved with. It was Frew Park at Milton. I don't know if many people know that site. It was the old Milton tennis court site. There was a proposal on that to build 3 8-storey buildings. Now, I've lived in that area. My daughter's the 5th generation to live in that area. So to say we're invested is a little bit of an understatement. So I decided that wasn't going to happen. And I took them to court. I lost. But the thing I learned during that court case was I virtually got an education in town planning not for free, it cost us quite a lot. The other thing I learned is there are an incredible number of people out there who actually work as professionals in the industry, and if you can tap into them and ask them for assistance, they will often do that for you. I ran that court case. I paid a set amount. I'll just tell you, I ran it for $50,000, and that was a 5-day court case. You could not do that today, but I was very lucky. I had people who gave me their professional advice for nothing. I had a solicitor who was paid, a set fee. No matter what happened, that's what he got paid. That's all I had. So that was the thing. And we lost that case. But what we did was we held it up long enough that the whole situation had changed. The economics of the situation had changed. Then I had always maintained the site flooded. What I discovered was that the Brisbane City Council had changed the levels on their flood levels by 2 metres. So they had allowed development that was, and what they had also done is they'd gone shopping for a hydrologist company that would give them the best outcomes so that they could develop on the maximum amount of land. And I had documentation of all of this. But when I went to court, I actually, I had found at the Milton, the old Lawn Tennis Association had put out a book that said the flood levels were this. The council said in the court case they were that. In the 2011 flood, through a set of circumstances, there was a very thin covering over the Milton tennis courts of soil that had never been there before. I wish we forced every child in Brisbane to read Mr. Archimedes' Bath, because water will find a level if you change a level, if you keep putting things into a basin, the water level will rise. That is basic physics. Do you know, that's what happened. And of course, in 2011, houses flooded that had never flooded in that area before. So that's when the Lord Mayor suddenly decided that was perfect parkland. Do you know, the other thing that had happened is there was one, I had got the local school involved, I had, got various people, but we had a fellow who I never met, who every night wrote witty little sayings that he put up along Hague Road and Milton Road, all of them making comment about how this place should be parkland. And that went on for weeks and months. And do you know, we gathered petitions, we did all of the things that you do. And I can tell you, after years and years and years of doing this stuff, you do something that gets you one step ahead, they will then incorporate that into the next thing. Okay, so that's the game. Neil is perfectly correct. We are in a game, and it is the long term. But the thing that you're fighting for is your future, and it's a livable future that you're fighting for. And I honestly think the one thing I think we all need to really think about, God forbid, we are an animal. We actually have to live in the environment. If we destroy it, we go with the rest of them. Do you know, that's a really simple thing to remember. And can I tell you, it's coming closer. Yeah. And where we have politicians at the moment who are just going, I have a 3 or a 4 year term, and with a bit of luck, I can make my little pile and I can get out before the proverbial hits the fan. Guess what? It's coming, mate, and you're not going to be able to pass on to your friend. That's what I would say to you. And we need to stop the type of nonsense that is happening at the moment, because we need these green spaces. We need it as much as every animal in the state needs it.
Before I open it up, thank you so much, it was great. Thank you. Before I open it up to all these questions, one last one. The word alliance pops up a lot on our program. So there is Brisbane Residents United. United is kind of another word for an alliance. There's the South East Queensland Community Alliance, there's Protect the Bush Alliance, our organisation, I'm chairing the Brisbane Flight Path Community Alliance. So many alliances. How does one make sense of it? And where is the alliance that aligns all the alliances?
Okay, well, the way that Brisbane Residents United has always worked is we consider ourselves an education as well. Like, we have community groups who come and ask us sort of how you put together a community group and how you move forward. We have also done the business where, as I said, we write submissions to government and we do all that sort of stuff, and we appear before governmental committees and that. But it is a very difficult thing when somebody first starts out. And the only strength that we have as community is when we start to act as community. And that is when we join together within a group. Because I can tell you right now, unless they see us as a cohesive group who is able to channel and to put together our different organisations, they think they can very easily separate us. What is happening at the moment with Kurilpa is, I can tell you right now, it's Machiavellian straight away. It's the old divide and conquer. What they're saying to people, whether it's conscious or they're not, is that we are going to sacrifice the inner city, but we are going to leave the middle rings and the outer rings alone. Well, if you believe that, as I used to say, I've got a wonderful piece of land for you at Russell Island, which is a very old reference to something that happened in Queensland in the 70s and 80s. But that is what our government is doing. So we really, every community organisation has to start working with other groups to try and form those alliances and to become connected to it. Like the Queensland Southeast Alliance, that is a whole, that goes now from the Sunshine Coast right down through the Gold Coast. So we've got various groups from that get together and try and do things on that scale. So we are, and Brisbane Residents United is part of that. But I think there's a strength in that type of thing. And can I tell you, the closer you get to an election, the more important that type of coming together and acting as one becomes.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Let's open up for some questions before we break for lunch. Who would like to start? Mike has one, I have another one. Yep.
I'm on. Terry Hutchinson. My interest really is built heritage and National Trust. But yes. Now, the light shows, what bothers me a little is that and I haven't even visited them, but I've heard that there's a light show at Rome Street, there's a light show at the Botanic Gardens next door to us here. So there's a precedent for this one at Mount Coot-tha. So that's the first issue. So are we a bit late to this particular battle? Secondly, I'm really worried about fruit bats because there are some at Mount Coot-tha Gardens, and there's quite a colony the last time I visited there.
Ron, do you want to comment on this?
Yes, actually the light show, Lightscape is the company that's going to do that light show in the City Botanic Gardens. I suspect were only brought in because Lumina was meant to open for the Brisbane Festival. So the Lumina DA went up in August last year, and as you know, very quiet about that. People didn't know about it. But that was when we went to the first public consultation, that was what the proponents said. They were planning on it opening in September of this year. So the approval's only just come through at the end of July. So I guess, you know, with our protest, we have actually held things up somewhat, because I'd say that from what we're hearing, it went to council. In their defence, they wouldn't, when it was presented, they wouldn't have known all the details that were exposed in the objections, and a lot of experts wrote amazing objections about it, and they voted on it. And it was pretty much, this is before, a day after the development application went in, the Deputy Lord Mayor is talking about how wonderful it will be to the media and selling it. And all the reports that we had a look at are like PR documents. There's no detail in them. And I've been told by councillors that that's just the way it is. There isn't any detail, because they'll do that after they get approval.
If I can add two comments on the Lightscape one. Secondly, was part of the Village Festival in Sydney this year. As I mentioned, a number of us have been part of the Media Architecture Community internationally that actually is artists and designers that come up with these installations, and sometimes they're also indoors, they're not always out and exposing the natural environment. They're sometimes really urban, where they can have quite a nice effect on making urban fabric less aggressive and brutalist. But in this particular case, it did cause in Sydney quite an uproar, because for the first time it was a ticketed event. And in fact, I was there with extended family that came from northern New South Wales. We were, I think, 13 people, and the ticket price for all of us would have been $600. So we did not enter with the whole family, only 3 of us went, and it was empty. It was, Vivid is a multi-billion-dollar kind of exercise now over the years with all the income they've generated each year. But the ticketed event, our ticket stub said we were visitors 74 and 75, which is completely unheard of. And for about 500 meters, we didn't see any other visitors on the path. There was food truck operators that had no business because everyone was at the rocks and at other parts of Vivid. No one really wanted to go into the Botanic Gardens, and the actual installations were pretty pedestrian. You can go to Bunnings and buy a couple of remote controlled LEDs and put them into the lights. And from an artistic point of view, a lot of the actual artists working in that space have, in essence, been removing themselves from Vivid because it has been so commercialised as a cash cow for tourism New South Wales and the city of Sydney, that the original values of the artists actually doing really interesting and thought-provoking pieces, a lot of that has been lost. It is a very quick and dirty installations that even the media architecture artists are not very happy about. I'm not sure we have time for the fruit bats, but do you have a comment on that? Yeah.
If we can get access, and he'll be a brave mayor if he doesn't let us have it, I think we would certainly be putting up a bat and looking for the bats. So over at one of the developments at Goodna was there are no bats. There's no bats because you've done nothing for them, because there's no culverts. My goodness, bats were never designed to live in culverts. That's not where you go to look for bats, they just happen to use them. You go to the hollows and the trees, and when I put out an anabat, we had 8 bats and 2 of them were threatened. So, that's an example of what's so wrong with the system. We will certainly look at bats.
There's a question over there.
Oh, I have a question.
Okay, go for it.
Oh, sorry. I didn't see it. Well, I'm going to ask mine quickly. I was just wondering, in terms of the evidence-based approach, have you guys considered working with citizen scientists? Because there is, and there are other community organisations as well that I think can be brought in Scouts Australia that can be. And certainly with citizen science, there's the Atlas of Living Australia, and I just mentioned this to Sheena earlier on as well, that maybe that's an avenue for collecting some data and some evidence and rigorous approaches. Do you have any comments on that?
I can access data from those different databases. The important thing here is that proponents are only obliged to go to WildNet. So that's what I referred to before. And the government well knows that. However, if they have a little bit more integrity, they will also go to Bird Data, run by BirdLife Australia, and it's all collected on a certain method as opposed to eBird, which is more happy bird watchers keeping lists. A lot of people are using iNaturalist. Now, iNaturalist allows people who don't know species or may know some but don't know others to count 6 plants, but to take photographs of 2, to leave them in iNaturalist without a name on them, on the project that they've named and labelled on iNaturalist. When other people then come in and volunteer to identify them, that's good if people come in and do that who've got skill. Sometimes you'll find, for instance, I'm often asked to do them, there'll be little beasts that don't have 4 fingers, but they've got 5 fingers, so you have to go to another page in your ID book and make sure you're right. So you can have mistakes. iNaturalist is going to the Atlas of Living Australia. The Atlas of Living Australia goes to WildNet at the Queensland Government. It will sit there for 6 months before anyone looks at that data. They have 2.5 members of staff. They will take data from their park rangers, their own staff, their own people that are doing assessment work, main roads, infrastructure and power people. All those things have to get priority, and they've only 2.5 members of staff. There's about 10 million records sitting out there not put in. We have insects not classified because there are not enough people to classify them. So please, things need to go to WildNet. Don't rely on, give them to us, give them to Protect the Bushel Eyes. Bring this stuff to me. If you know anything for Mount Coot-tha, you can flog my inbox and I will correlate it bring it together because we need the information you have.
There's 3 more questions. I think we're going to have to break for lunch. Caroline, yeah? Do you want to grab the microphone from Jen and then one and we'll roll in?
Mine's probably not a question. Mine is a grave concern that's not just Lumina with Mount Coot-tha. I live in Boston Road, which borders Mount Coot-tha. They're talking about expanding mountain bike tracks, and that really puts the fear of God into me. A neighbour was walking in one of the tracks very close to my house and had to get someone to rescue a sick koala because a mountain biker came round the corner whizzing far faster than he should have been, scared a poor koala that was full of chlamydia that was down on the ground, and it fell down a gully. We had to get people to rescue it. It luckily was taken to a hospital, rehabilitated, but it had to be put back into Mount Coot-tha, back to the same situation where these mountain bikers have only got one thing in mind, their own selfish need to get out there, their need for speed. They are putting tracks through the bush, which are illegal. And when you look at the rules for the Brisbane City Council, they have no one checking this. It comes down to people to dob them in. So you can have health level, whatever you want to do in Brisbane in the Mount Coot-tha area, and it is owned by Brisbane City Council. Diaguila Range is a state government forest, but Mount Coot-tha is Brisbane City Council. They own it. They also give over to various different charities. So the QUT Trail does their thing once a year through there. They widen all the tracks, mow down everything, and let these. Some people are doing it for the right reason, but there's a lot of other people going there yahooing, screaming, yelling, litter, and it goes all day and all night, once again through Mount Coot-tha. And then on top of that, Marcus will talk about the flight paths across it, and Archibald Airport have got planes flying below 1,000 feet over Mount Coot-tha because they consider it to be non-populated, and an aircraft is allowed to fly 500 feet, which is 150 metres above the highest object on the landscape. So they are allowed to fly that low, and there would be birds of prey, there would be all sorts of animals, but we're going to have a bird strike there, and they're going to hit populated areas, and the definition of a populated area means that that whole area of Mount Coot-tha should not be flown at those levels because you have to be, there are definitions, they've gone to the dictionary, they've gone everything. If you look at CASA, the definition of a populated area is not being adhered to by Archibald and all that, what I call them bug smashers, because they are so low, they are hitting bugs, okay? And we can't even afford that, but it is funny and it is a joke, but we are losing the insects of the world. I just drove from Canberra, I had a family illness, and driving back from there, I almost didn't have to wash my car. Once upon a time on family holidays, you had to have a screen across the front of your car. This is a crisis, and we have one just in this beautiful area. It is the lungs of Brisbane, and Air Services Australia, another thing Marcus will point out, when they did this new flight paths, they specifically picked on every green area in Brisbane. And if you follow the new NPR flight path, it goes through Mount Coot-tha, Toohey Forest, it goes through all the forest, it goes all the way through Mount Coot-tha, goes out to the forest out past the gap. So they have picked on all the green areas. What's the Brisbane City Council doing? Yay, do it. We'll let you do it. What's the state government doing? Yay, go ahead, do it. We have to protect these areas, and Lumina is one, but as a big group, all of us, as you're saying, alliances, we need to protect this area and our green spaces. Sorry.
Thank you, Caroline. That's a fantastic summary of the alliances and actually the connection between the groups. Thank you. Much as I'll take it as a comment and go to squeeze in the other 2 questions on the back there, yes?
Hi, my name's Thomas Oram. I'm a very new PhD student at QUT, not currently with the More-than-Human Futures lab, but potentially in the future. I have a background in architectural lighting design, so I guess it is a voice here. My biggest concern with Lumina is the way it's done. It's a sort of corporate tourism-based lighting show. And by going in that path, you're having to compete with all the other lighting festivals and performances that have been happening since the early 90s with the beginning of the Fête de Lumière in Lyon. If we're following that path, it sort of doesn't allow that it's going to remain a small thing. It's going to have to grow, because if you're competing with Vivid, and you're competing with festivals in Saudi Arabia, like one Brunei, where they had a 1.6 million lumen lighting installation. That's a lot of lumens, if you don't know that. That's the precedent that's being set as a global thing with this growth of light festivals. So if it's over a 5-year period, I don't see that once people start going, it'll lose interest, and they're going to have to grow if they want to keep it as an ongoing thing. So that's my big concern, is that it can't just be what they're advertising currently. They're going to have to be looking at growth, and it's going to become a more complex problem and have more impact in that green space.
Laura, do you want to comment on this?
Yes, I think globally we can see that there is an uprise in a lot of different light shows around different cities. And I think just also not even particular events, but like fairy lights around a lot of trees is very common. And we're just more and more getting used to the idea. And also, I think year by year, fireworks on New Year's and different events just become bigger and bigger, and we are used to that spectacle, and you just have to increase that. But I think bottom line is just to sort of address that, why do we need such spectacles for our entertainment within cities, and sort of find alternate resources of engagement as human beings or in communities. But why do these light shows or firework events become resources of community engagements where there can be better alternates?
Yeah, I have a theory around that. I think that whole slogan, as you would see, it's omnipresent in all the marketing rhetoric that Brisbane City Council produces. There's more things to see and do in Brisbane. You probably have heard that slogan in every single newsletter. It's in essence bread and circuses. The way that people get bedazzled with the Hollywood genre of new movie trailers, and here we have new city trailers. So Howard Smith Wharf is kind of the hotspot right now, and everyone's waiting for the casino to open to then go up to the public sky deck, which actually is all private, and there's private security guards and private bylaws, and from there you then go on to the next thing, whether it is the Barrambin development that actually has footpaths that are 8 meters wide in order to make space for music events that will cater for 30,000 people. And some rumours are saying that they might close River Stage for yet another development behind here at Gardens Point. And so there's this constant trail of, Marvel-style trailers being released, because that seems to be a particular demand of entertainment that it caters to, and it is quite a worry. But I think behind all that is this bread and circuses kind of philosophy. We do have to draw this to a close. I think Sean also wanted a question, so I've seen Sean for a while there, and then we go to this gentleman over there.
Thank you. I'd just like to point to a meta problem that I think we're all aware of anyway. One of the tyrannies of this whole process of development in posts is the very brief amount of time that communities or any professional group has to respond to very vast proposals. Toowoomba is a classic example which I've been peripherally involved in. There's many that you can point to. Maybe one of the things that we need to consider in terms of medium-term thinking and activity is getting those periods extended. So instead of 40 days, it's 80 days or 120 days, a lot longer. Of course, that means people have to put more effort in over a longer time. But one of the things about that is that it would slow down the obsession with making a quick buck, slipping it through the cracks. So maybe that's something the allies and alliances might want to think about.
Yes, thank you. And it does align nicely with what Tim said earlier, the conundrum between the urgency and reconciling it with the slow food movement. Yes.
Look, I'll make a point about the about looking for that. When you look at the Lumina proposal, that was mooted with the council in about February, and it then went through a lot of regurgitations inside the council and inside the developer, and that wasn't put out to public comment until about November. So the people that were writing the report had about 6 months to write them on sound and all the other bits and pieces. And they had that period that you're talking about, that 6 month period, to write about it. And then they gave us 10 days to actually to reply to it. It's been a bit crazy because they've only just approved it about 9 months later. And we could have been making comments all the way through because of that. Now, the other thing with Lumina that I got upset was that Botanical Gardens is a special, internationally recognised set of gardening materials. The stuff that's there, the garden is internationally recognised. We should preserve it as an international area. Lumina can go somewhere else, and I'd sort of suggested it goes to the quarry, but
Yes.
that would be lovely. But the reason it's not going to the quarry is that it would be very expensive for Lumina to set it up. So they get a free go and putting it in the park because it's cheap to do it there, and that's the best profit notion. Now, the other thing that when you start reading about the DA approvals, DA approval has stuff for residents next to ovals about sound and about light. We don't have those agreements legislated for plants and for animals. And that's what we really need to do at the moment is to get some legislation in place that does that. Now, after I looked at that, we had another problem at John Keir Gardens, which was pretty similar. So I went and found the koala habitat plan that's done at the state government level. And when I had a look at it for the Lumina one, it stops on the boundary of the Botanic Gardens because the Botanic Gardens are owned by the council and are a separate entity. And that was what Neil was saying. You've got to have a look at the different governments to actually figure out what the heck's going on. Because the koala habitat, which occurs across the road from it, is not put into the Botanic Gardens. So we can't complain about the Botanic Gardens having koalas in it to stop them doing development.
Thank you. We'll draw to a close here. Elizabeth, unfortunately, I have to run off. You were 15 minutes just now, so just sending your apologies. But please join me in thanking our remaining panelists on stage here.